Welcome to Q2, the questions, queries podcast.
Okay, Nicola,
Sammy,
thank you for coming here
thank you for having me.
into the deep dark Ranui to have a little conversation. I actually have a confession to make. I don't know how to pronounce your new last name because you were Nicola Kissick, but now what is your name?
Gujer.
Goya.
Gujer, yeah.
And where does that come from?
Swiss, but apparently because Swiss isn't a written language, it's French, I think.
Really? Do you know what it means?
No.
Oh.
No, it means I'm married to a Swiss man.
And he is a handsome Swiss man
Such
at that.
a handsome man.
No, he's a pretty cool guy. And so...
Good name. Damn.
Okay, so what did you... I kind of want to talk about, obviously we've mentioned this, but for those that are listening, I wanted to talk to you because I think that you obviously are a very awesome person, a very interesting person.
I'll take that.
As I mentioned, I really wanted to talk to a lady and someone that's a friend of mine as well. So it was
I'm both of those.
You are both of those. We grew up together in deep time, I'm going to say that again, in Whangarei, which was a very cool place. Said someone maybe. But no, so you studied something at university and I'd like you to tell me a little bit about what you studied at university and we'll kind of go from there.
So I studied physics and maths at uni. When it got to the more postgrad stages, I went into the more astronomy, astrophysics. I don't know which of those it falls into. It's a weird line that's drawn that some people argue different sides. But yeah, I studied that.
Cool. And so, because you're at uni for a while, eh?
I started off, I did a couple of years at Waikato, then I had a few years off, and then I took it back up again at Auckland. So I think 5.5 years all up, I think. So.
A lot of people tend to, when they drop uni, and this is someone that I've been through the same experience, but they'll drop uni and then they won't go back to uni, or they'll change or they'll evolve and they'll want to do something else. What is it that specifically drew you back into doing the sciences?
Oh, I'm freaking stubborn. It was, I never dropped it because I didn't want to do it anymore. I dropped it for the circumstances. I'd completely just overworked myself. I'd completely burnt out myself and I just needed a few years off to recuperate, get myself back together before I could actually even tackle it again. So the thing with physics and maths, it was never something I was super talented at. It was just something I chose to do for whatever reason. I still have no idea why. But I was never super good at it, so it was a lot of hard work for me to accomplish what I wanted to. And I was wanting to be that straight A student, and I couldn't be because I wasn't super talented at it. So I had to work really hard at it. And yeah,
in some sort of masochistic way, you just wanted to... No, like I get that. I have the similar thing with martial arts. Like I feel like I don't have a natural affinity for it by any means, and like it takes me longer to get pretty much anything. But that's good, you know. Like it's good to make it difficult. Yeah,
mentally it was a hard place to be because like you're surrounded by especially smart people. I think it was that thing with like physics is just got that mentality around it. A lot of people from the science community, like physicists will say, oh, physics is the peak of sciences, you know, like they rank themselves as the superior scientists. And so if you have someone wanting to, I'm not saying that's the case at all, but if you have someone who wants to study physics, you can tend to attract that kind of person who is like super, super good at what they do, like super intelligent. And I came across some really, really, really smart people doing what I was doing. That's not to say they were dicks. Like I came across some really, really nice people as well. But for me, when I felt I wasn't naturally talented at it, I felt like I was just fighting this massive uphill battle to just try stay on this even playing field, I guess. And so, yeah, I totally got burnt out the first time round. I just expected way too much of myself, I think, yeah.
Well, you got to have a balance, right? You have to.
Yeah,
I think.
And
yeah.
It took me like a long time to learn what that balance was, and to learn. I mean, like also those early years of adulthood, you're kind of learning who you are as well, and you get to know what your triggers are and what your faults are and what your strengths are. And I guess I just learned it a hard way.
Yeah, it's such a formulative stage. Like people talk about I guess high school being like this formative thing, but I think for me it's more important is that leaving high school and that next 5 years.
Yeah, no, it's totally how it was for me. Like high school was a routine, you know, like I had high school nailed. I was a very organized person, and so you know what you've got to do. You're like, right, I've got this test, I'm going to study for that, and I've got work in the weekend, I'm going to do that. But when it came to uni, it's a whole different ball game of operating. And yeah, it's also that time where everyone's trying to figure out who they are, and you have people becoming like bigger personalities than necessarily they might have at high school, because they don't have those sort of high school constructs sort of keeping them down, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's like pre-established parameters, you know, like you exist, and there's not a lot of like, someone's usually set your life up for you to a certain degree, and you're just sort of like coasting through it, and then you have to figure out what the fuck you're going to do with with your life, and that's hard. So you kind of said like you wanted to study those subjects because they challenged you, but there must be something more to that, right? There must be some reason as to why you wanted to study them in the first place, beyond that they were difficult and that you want to do the sciences. Like, is there kind of a bit more of a romantic aspiration there, or is it?
I think like at the simplest level, I would say I always loved maths because I mean, like I was good at it at high school, and so it makes you feel like you have a place in something, I guess. But I love that aspect of it's right or wrong. So I hated like you could submit an art piece and someone might hate it and someone might love it, but you might get the marker that gives you an achieved, whereas some other teacher might have given you that excellence. Like I just remember in year 9, I had this art class and we had to do the self-portraits, which you always have to do. And I just didn't like what I was doing, and I had a little bit like of an eccentric art teacher, and they came along. I'm like, ugh. Like, fine. So I started putting like this blue in my cheeks and like green in my hair, and she came along, she's like, that's awesome. And I'm like, oh god, I hate this so much. like I think from that point on I was just like, this kind of subjectivity is perhaps not for me. It's not how I operated at the time. And so I loved with maths, it's right or wrong, there's different ways to do things, but your final answer is black and white,
essentially the same.
Yeah. And obviously as you get further through the sciences, that's not the case at all. And, you know, you get to maths at uni and your life is ruined because you're like, all these theorems that you thought were 100% solid are all just built on assumptions. And you're like, what's happened?
Yeah. Is there any in particular that were kind of like, that stood out to you and because of that? No. Nothing? No, yeah. It's interesting, eh? Like creativity is, we almost have this balance, and I find it a lot in my profession, like in the creative industry, for lack of a better word. But I still have like to balance this practicality and right and wrong, and versus like, it's like the right and left brain argument, which is such a commonly touted thing.
Yeah.
How, like in what ways in the sciences as you progressed did you see more creativity? Like where does it sort of start coming in?
I don't know. I feel like that's an individual thing. Like I don't think it is introduced at different levels. One thing I really loved was strangely what a lot of pure scientists frown upon and say is not like a proper science subject, but as part of my degree, I had to choose so many, because I did a double major, physics and maths. I chose so many physics papers, so many maths papers, and for a third year maths paper, I chose education and mathematics. And I loved that paper because like you're sitting down and you're talking about like misconceptions that people have in maths. So it was something in high school that I found came easy to me. I had that sort of brain that just processed those sort of patterns. When I got to university, I found it a lot harder because probably little factor of I'd been coasting on it a bit too much, hadn't worked hard enough. But like this education maths paper was awesome because you're just actually standing back from it and going, so this is the way to do it. You know that because you're a third year maths student. Like you obviously know that that's how that works. That's what an equal sign means. That's how you do algebra, blah, 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 blah. But this is how people interpret it, and this is how people interpret it, and that's where they get it wrong. And it was super interesting. Like,
so is that how that information's absorbed by different people?
Yep. So right. you say one thing to someone, and people are going to interpret it in different ways. And so if you've got like a maths teacher, they might have a really straightforward mind of this is the right way, but they don't realize what they're saying and how it's being interpreted, I guess. And so it was really interesting, like, to have those conversations with people about because that's what a lot of the class was about. We read a lot of case studies and papers, and then we would just discuss them. So rather than this, like the rest of my papers were very much you sit down, the lecturer talks for an hour, you take notes. Like you're just learning rather than discussing. So this paper was awesome because you're actually discussing perhaps your experiences, what this paper said, how you can see things went, and all that sort of stuff. And so it was like a really interesting one to take, but people would think it's not necessarily like proper maths or proper physics, but it's super important, because if you can't communicate what you've done, what's the point in doing it?
Absolutely, especially for like the stereotype like introverted sort of math genius, like learning how to convey that information and get people to understand what you're saying. It seems like it'd be immensely important.
Yeah.
Unless you want to live in your own little bubble.
Which some people are happy doing,
Absolutely.
but that's not effective science. If you can't like explain it to someone else, or, you know, have someone in your team that can explain it to someone else, then you're not really doing anyone any good. If you can't share your knowledge, then knowledge kept to yourself is no fun at all.
For sure. So you did your undergraduate, and you had postgraduate study. What was the postgraduate in specifically?
So I only went as far as honours, but so the way that is constructed is you still do 6 papers, and then you do another 2 papers, but those 2 papers are your dissertation. So that's a research subject, and that can be different. Some people do it fully experimental, some people do it fully just computational, like doing models and stuff like that, or some people are actually working with equipment. So mine, I did, it was like almost like a practical astronomy sort of based thing. So its technical term is astronomical seeing. And so that is measuring, kind of like when you look on the horizon and you see like a mirage and it's really ripply, like from the heat or something like that. And the object you see through it is super distorted because of those ripples. And that's basically what I was measuring. So when you look at a star and it's all twinkling and changing colours, that's because as it comes down through the Earth's atmosphere, the light's getting all shifted and moved. So I was basically measuring how good or bad a site was, or a particular time of day, or well, not day, but night was, and that's called astronomical seeing. So it's basically how still the atmosphere is where you are.
Okay, interesting. And so did you have like a hypothesis going into it? Is there like a particular, or are you just sort of comparing these different locations?
Yeah, so I had a particular method that I used, which was called differential image motion monitor. So that's DIM. People use DIM masks. It's what they call it. So that is it's a used technique all over the world. They have telescopes set up at like Mauna Kea and all these huge observatories. They'll have a telescope set up with a DIM mask that runs alongside their massive telescope that measures the seeing throughout the night. So it's not a new concept by any means. And that's quite the case with honours projects and stuff like that. It's not till you get to, like, masters is usually a little bit more of an extension. It's your PhD stuff that has to be like that groundbreaking science. But yeah, like the honours stuff is just kind of like, it can be really important stuff, or it can just be like repeating something. I don't know. It's just having fun with the subject. Just having a play around. Like, there was stuff that so in the department I was at, no one really did observational astronomy. So none of the lecturers knew much about it. They all kind of work with data that is given to them from various telescopes or theoretical stuff. So we were all figuring it out. Like, none of us knew what was going on. And I was using one of the university telescopes, which hadn't been used for a number of years. So no one in the department knew a thing about it. So I had to figure out which parts it was missing and how to put it all together and get it working again. And, you know, it would come to the case of, like, I would just try to figure something out, and it would just be like, you know, I'd go to my supervisor and they'd just kind of be like, well, I don't know, you tell me. Like,
that's cool, though.
We were all learning, and so that was awesome too.
Yeah, no, like having those sort of problems is really satisfying, right? Because you have like these things to...
It was almost like, it was interesting for me because there wasn't that right or wrong answer. Like, there were several ways of doing something, and so I was trying to figure out the best way for me or our situation.
And one thing I want to touch on is because I'm not that skilled up on physics, and it was just a subject that
I don't think anyone is.
no, right? It's a very difficult subject to talk about, well, to understand to a certain degree. And I obviously was very ignorant in high school. But so you're talking about it was dim mask, is that correct?
DIMM.
DIMM. So is that, so presumably, like me from a film perspective, if you're like, oh, I'm going to, put something in front of this telescope, you'd be thinking like a lens. You'd be thinking something that fixes curvature or whatever.
So you want to know what it looks like?
Well, like, I'm just wondering, like, where does in terms of like the mathematical side, the equations and stuff, and I know a little bit, I have a very rudimentary understanding of like radio telescopes and how that works, and it's not just seeing by the traditional sense, it's radio waves and yada yada. So how does sort of the mathematics mirror into like the actual operation of the dim?
The concept of it is actually pretty simple, and I don't like to use those words easily because those are some of the most damaging things that have been said to me at university, but it's really cool. It's like so you've got the eye of the telescope, so the front of the telescope is what you're looking through, so imagine a big circle. Now you put this mask over, which is a mask, it blanks out the whole thing except for two holes, symmetrical, same size, and one hole in my case was just a empty hole, so that was just a drilled hole in this mask, and the other one had a small like wedge lens, so just like a piece of glass in it. And so the concept is you've got these two columns of light coming down, so you point it at a star. So if you're looking through the telescope, you would see one dot. You put this dim mask on, you look through the telescope, you see two dots, and that's because you have two bits of this starlight coming down through the atmosphere. And the theory behind it, I guess, is that they're coming through two slightly different columns of atmosphere because they're however spaced apart they are on the mask. And so this light is coming down through two different columns of atmosphere. So then I record it, and you've got these two dots that are wobbling, and they're wobbling independently, so they're not wobbling at the same time together. And so then what I did was I pulled apart a webcam and I chucked that in where you would put an eyepiece in the telescope. So then you've got it's like the telescope is the lens of the webcam. And so I'm recording all the data at 30 frames per second. And then I wrote a bit of code that just goes through frame by frame, finds the center of each of those stars. So it's each circle that you see, and then it measures the difference between them horizontally and vertically. And then you chuck it through a whole lot of nasty equations, and it says how much it was moving. So if they don't have a lot of movement between each other, then you've got a good night. The atmosphere's been really still, and visually you would see like a really nice clear star or planet or whatever. But if they were jiggling a lot, then you would see really bloated stars. Like if you were to look through something, it would be really ripply. And yeah, so it's just that concept of two columns of light, slightly different columns, and seeing what the difference is between them.
That's fascinating. So firstly, I'm going to get you to, whenever you put your hand up, let's see if we can figure this out. Because you keep jumping around this. If you just keep your hand over top of that. Yeah, just like that. And you won't jiggle it around so much. It's all good. Good.
Right.
Don't overthink it. I'm sorry.
I'm a handsy person.
Me too. Jazz. No, that's cool. So what kind of things influence that light? Like what kind of, obviously, because you're talking about like the atmosphere, the differentials between those two, and that's what you're measuring. So what causes that to be a good night or a bad night?
So sights are usually quite consistent. So you've got things like, obviously it's going to be better later in the night because the ground isn't radiating all that heat from the sunlight that it's stored during the day.
Okay.
So this is sort of a thing that people would run an experiment checking how good the seeing was over a couple of months before they built a massive observatory there, because you put a lot of money into choosing a site for an observatory and like building a dome and the foundations and mounting a telescope and everything. It's very expensive, so they want to make sure they've chosen the right place to do it. So there's things like your building materials of what you would choose to build your dome out of. You would build those, like you would choose those very specifically because of how quickly they lose their heat from the day, how much heat they store and stuff like that, because that's going to cause a problem. But geographically, there's things like obviously altitude. So the higher up a mountain you are, the less atmosphere that starlight is coming down through. So that's why all your big observatories, like in Chile and Mauna Kea and all that sort of thing, are usually as high up a mountain as you can get, just so that it's less atmosphere that the starlight's traveling down through. And then it's great to have things like by the water, because that is usually quite a uniform sort of turbulent profile comes through, I guess, because you don't have lots of different materials, that you don't have different rocks and trees and valleys and all that sort of stuff. So valleys are horrible for turbulence. It's why like hang gliders and stuff like that go off mountains, because you can get all these updrafts and all that sort of stuff. And then so you've got your heat from radiating from the sunlight during the day, and then you've got the wind whipping through can create turbulence and all that sort of stuff. So
it's fascinating how all that changes the image that you can look at in the sky.
Yeah, and now you think of like the main observatories. That's why I'm going to keep coming back to it, but Mauna Kea is so great because it's Hawaii, it's coastal, and it's massively up a mountain. Like I think where the telescope actually is, they have the telescope up higher up the mountain than the control room, because there's a lack of oxygen up there, I think. So They actually have the control room further down the mountain so that you don't get that like altitude effect on you.
That's interesting. I wouldn't think about Hawaii being like a high place, but I suppose it's
it just
bigger
shoots
than
up, I guess. Yeah,
interesting.
You get snow up the mountains there. And,
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
It's pretty cold.
So do you like? Is that the place that you'd say geek out the most if you went to? Do you
A
reckon?
little bit, but mainly because recently I've had two sets of friends go there, and they've both messaged me while they're there being like, oh, I'm at Mauna Kea.
You're like, no.
And they bring me presents, and I'm like,
It's a hard place to get to. Hawaii is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you think it's closer, but it really isn't.
No, it's
it really isn't.
not. I always thought it was close to the States. I thought it was like just there.
Yeah, because you're like,
but it's not.
it's totally logical that they've chosen it as part of their territory as well. But
Yep.
not so much.
Not at all. And so what? What are you doing now for the profession? You're working and doing software kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, so I've done what everyone does, and I work in IT.
It's interesting, eh? So is that because you've done the mathematics sort of background and?
I don't know. It's funny. Like because I put off my graduation so that I could graduate with some friends, because I started my postgrad halfway through the year. So I was with two sets of graduates basically, and so I put off my graduation so that I could graduate with the second set, because the first set had obviously graduated while I was still studying. And like everyone's saying to me now, because I've been on my job for almost a year now, and they're saying, oh, now that you've graduated, are you going to do something that you studied? I'm like, well, that was never going to be the thing. You know, I was always going to you're not really going to use a physics degree unless you do at least masters, but probably do at least PhD. Well, sorry. Yeah, you'd usually be at least masters to use your degree, but usually PhD to actually study in the field. But I wasn't too interested in doing research, and I never wanted to go through to PhD. So everyone's like, oh, you're going to actually use your degree now? I'm like, well, I am. I never expected to get a job that would actually use my physics knowledge. And that was in part one of the most crushing things when you're really struggling at uni, having the worst time with all these assignments, and like you're just like, I'm never going to use this.
Yep.
No one ever needs to know about what this waveform looks like or how to solve this equation and what that means. And that was really hard, because you're doing it just to get the degree, and you're not actually going to use that piece of knowledge. But the most useful thing I got from my degree is the critical thinking, is how to approach a problem, how to look at it from different sides, and to see what it's actually telling you, I guess, when you read the problem. Like, it's easy in some sense when you're at high school, because they'll say, using this theorem, solve this problem. But when you get to uni, it's like, here's your problem, find this. But you need to know that you need to solve 5 other things first before you can get what you need to solve that problem. And I guess that's something that's really useful. And what I do is, because there is no user guide quite often to know why something's gone wrong, and you have to logically step back and go, right, if this is happening, they might have done this or this, let's check that out. If that's not the case, we can rule that out, we can move on to this. Like, it's just a good way of thinking about things.
No, I totally agree. And I have a few points that I'd like to bring up based on sort of what you're saying. The first is that I think it's really important to not feel like your information that you've learned is invalid just because you're not in the profession. Like, you've still spent time studying this, you've still spent time, and you're just on your own journey. Like,
I think that's one of the scariest things though, like when you're at high school, is there's so, like, and I'm a planner. Like, I like to have everything sussed, and so it was the hardest thing, because you think, right, the decision I make now at year 11 before I choose all my papers for NCEA is going to affect the rest of my life. But like, that's not the reality. You see everyone now who goes to university, we're not necessarily using our degrees for exactly what they say they are. Like, there's skills that you get during those degrees that are more valuable than the knowledge, because it's something that you pick up, and it's transferable to so many things.
absolutely. Like, I haven't actually finished my degree because I had to you obviously know, but I went to university, and then we did that 6 months film school, went back to university at 25 or something, did the majority of it. I've got a sort of year to go. But for me, I left because I got a career opportunity. But the biggest thing that I feel like I got at university is, as you say, critical thinking, because you can't just say something, you need to back it up. You need to research it, and people cheat the system, and they'll have like a fundamental hypothesis. They'll have a hypothesis, and they'll just find resources that will support whatever they're saying.
Oh, let's not go down that track.
No, but yeah, lots of people do that, right? But that's not the way to do it, and that's the easy road. But I don't think that's the right road.
It's such a damaging way to do it, because you put the label science on things, and people go, "Oh, it's fact, it's for sure."
Yeah.
But then you get, dare I say it, the autism from vaccines and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, that doesn't take long. It's like a slight amount of research into that and figure. But anyway, we won't go to that. But like, I think there's a curve. There's a curve in terms of what university can do for you.
Yeah.
And for me, actually, speaking as someone that didn't finish it, but it did taper off. Like, after I finished second year, I was like, okay, like I've got the critical thinking now, and anything I do into this next year is going to be learning more about nuanced subjects, and that's cool. Like, learning about stuff's fantastic, and having information is great, especially if you're interested and passionate about it.
It's one of those opportunities, like, when else in your life are you going to?
Absolutely.
Like, when else am I going to have a conversation about misconceptions in mathematics? You know, like, that doesn't come naturally to me, and I study math, so like, it's definitely not going to come naturally to most people I like socialize with as well. So yeah, it's interesting times to develop your knowledge and your interests. And I always hated the electives, because it's like, I don't want to study anything else. This is what I want to study. Stop trying to make me study one of these things.
Yeah. See, I was like doing Bachelor of Arts, which is kind of the epitome of that mentality, right? It's like, it's just a bunch of different things, and I was like, you know what, I want to start learning a bit of Māori, and I want to, start learning more about this and that, and that's rad, man. That's cool. And I think we have this capitalist society. Nothing wrong with the capitalist. Well, there is wrong, but it's the best we got. I'm not trying to shit on capitalism, but it does have this like highly competitive nature to it, and it creates a lens in which we view all our actions as, how does this have positive economic gain?
Oh, it's totally one of the things I hated about university as well, is you are essentially ranked on your intelligence, because especially in the sciences, you have 100% assessment on assignments and examinations, and I am so passionately against exams, because it doesn't test my knowledge of the subject. Because when it comes to physics, we don't get a formula sheet, so you spend your whole time for your revision trying to memorize 50 formulas just for one paper. And then it comes to exam time, you're not testing my knowledge, you're testing my ability to remember things and my ability to work well under pressure within a certain time frame, where I found I worked a lot slower than some of the other guys, but I was really thorough. And so exams never worked out in my favor, but I'm fully judged in how I perform in those. But there's so many attributes that can't be ranked or shown by those sort of systems.
Absolutely. And that's like, I think it harks back to I think we need to reconsider how we look at education. And I think it stems from that. It's almost like the same mentality that you have in high school, right? Like, you rote learn something. But
people are picking up on that now. You know, you've got your learning by seeing, learning by doing, people are starting to trigger onto those are different methods, and some teachers do effectively try to teach across all of them just to try to reach every person in their classroom.
My favourite paper that I did was by a guy named John Johansson. He's now like the chief of staff of the New Zealand First Party, I think. Yeah, it's a weird little fact. But he was, I got the best grades in his class because essentially he boiled down the vast majority of the grades as much as he could to one research paper. And he just like picked something. It was American politics. And was like, pick something you're interested in. And like some people were like, well, fuck, like what do I do? Like what kind of thing can I study? What kind of like, that's way too open-ended. But I was like, fuck yeah, I like this. I'm going to like, I picked privacy because American privacy is the world's privacy. Like in terms of internet law and stuff, we're very much susceptible to whatever they do. And that was rad, like just having that self-directed learning. But I had the maturity of coming back as a mature student.
Yeah.
You know, like I could make those sort of decisions.
See, going off that though, one of the most terrifying exams I've ever had to do was for that education and mathematics paper, because we had spent all of our class times just having like really interesting discussions. We had to read through every research paper that had been mentioned that semester, which was usually 1 or 2 a week, and kind of know them all well enough to be able to answer a whole lot of multi-choice questions and write 2 essays about it. So there's so much information to take in, and I was terrified, like, if we had a conversation, yeah, I could tell you about that learning theory, but if the question said this person and this person's learning theory, I would not have a clue. And so I enjoyed it as a paper, but I hated it as a paper to study for. You know, the examination was just terrifying.
It's funny, because in reality, all those things that we're so stressed about in those times mean very little. They virtually nothing. Like,
but at the time, it's like it's your social ranking.
But yeah,
it's your standing
in
your
that perception.
Class. Yeah.
That's your own perception. I have a big thing at the moment about comparing myself to others, and this is part of the reason. Like one of the reasons I shaved my head is because I was always playing with my hair, and my hair was it would either make me feel peacocky, like, yeah, I got a fucking cool slick back today, or it would be like fussing with it, and I'd be like, it's not quite right, and it made me annoyed. Whereas now it's neutral, you know, and I just, that's just a microcosm. I experience it a lot in martial arts. Like I see people have spent less time in it, and they're doing better than I am, and they, you know, and I'm thinking about shit, they're beating me all the time, and X, Y, Z. But they're just on their own journey, and I'm on my own journey. And as much as we can get out of our own heads and stop comparing ourselves to others, which I think our society does very poorly, is because we're constantly in comparison. If you just realize you're on your own journey, then that's cool. Like, you can take the university example. You know, you might not have the natural affinity as some other people, so they're going to get better grades than you. But just pursue excellence in yourself and do as much best as you can.
But I mean, like, comparing, I mean, like, I'm a twin. I've grown up both comparing myself and being compared, because you have this person who is in the same classes as you, is in the same stage of life as you. And so I always felt like people were comparing us. And sometimes people actually verbalize their comparisons as well. But I was always comparing myself against her. Like, I always had someone else to directly measure my progress against, even though we were on completely different journeys, as in what we studied and what sort of people we were. But I was always like, she's doing this better than me. And I've just grown up comparing myself. Yeah. Yeah,
that's hard. But that's it, right? Like, that's, I think, innately what we do as humans, is that we have that comparative thing. But like, I just think it's necessary to challenge that idea in our head as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. It's not healthy.
No.
Like, no one else gains anything from you comparing yourself.
And I think for me personally, it's a source of a lot of my own anxiety. Like, if I boiled down to the root of it, and I went and did like 5 psych sessions on my own dime, and not because I had any kind of really prominent thing, but I was like, I just want to
drill into it a bit.
Yeah, I just want to like clear out my closet and just see what's sort of there, you know. And you don't ever get any revelations.
It's brave.
Yeah, well,
willingly opening your closet.
Yeah, I mean, it's an experience, but it's really beneficial. I recommend it to anyone. But anyway, so I, you know, for my point on this, but as I was sort of clearing that closet, I was basically looking at my anxiety, and because anxiety is something that it's not so clear cut, you know. It's not this. It's very subjective. It's very like sometimes you can't perceive it properly, that sometimes it's caused by things that are completely unrelated to what you think it was being caused by.
And it's one of those things, another person could go through the exact same situation as you and they have a completely different experience.
Yeah, and I think you just have to be, my psych was basically talking a lot about be curious.
Okay.
So when I'm feeling anxious, and me feeling anxious now, I think is I've realized it's kind of feeling uncomfortable, not really, comfortable in whatever because essentially if I don't have anxiety, I can just sit, I can just be still. And so a little bit of a tangent here, but like for an example, I would often have bad habits that would form out of me feeling bored, and he'd be like, okay, well, what is boredom? Because essentially it's nothing. It's more about your inability to deal with that nothing's happening.
Yep.
And so that's actually an anxious thing. And so it's like challenging all these sorts of ideas. But I think I think it's immensely important. And I feel like we need to challenge ourselves. We need to challenge ourselves in those moments and try and figure out our own little anxieties and try to forgive ourselves and try to stop comparing ourselves.
That's why everyone says it's like get used to being by yourself before you move on to your next relationship or whatever. Like actually just be at peace with who you are, and I guess
so much easier said than done though. Jesus Christ, sorry. Anywho, that's a bit of a side tangent on anxiety. How did you? So we kind of talked about this earlier, but I wanted to kind of get into gender in your profession, at least what you were studying, because mathematics and physics must be
so many girls.
It'd be a very male-dominated profession for. Actually, what do you think the reason is? Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because when I first started university, I decided to have maths as my first major. So I turned up to University of Waikato and I had mathematics as my first major, physics as my second. So that put me in the School of Computing and Mathematical Sciences. And so they had like an induction day on that. So I turn up the first day, sit in this big lecture hall with everyone else in that school who was a first year, and I'm like, I do not belong here. And I don't know why I thought that, because I've always had a lot of really good guy mates, and their sense of humour and activities and all that sort of thing has always gelled better with me than girls have. But I just had this overwhelming feeling of I don't belong here. And not long after that, I changed my first major to physics, which put me in the School of Science and Engineering, which strangely you wouldn't think is any better, but I guess I wasn't at the induction day for that, so I didn't see what that crowd looked like. But in first year, there were a few amount of girls, and there was a girl in my hall who I kind of buddied up with, and we did our physics paper together, and we were our lab partners together and everything. But once I got to second year, I was the only girl. There were no other girls majoring in it, no other girls in my classes. Quite a few of the physics classes also had the electrical engineers in it, not a single girl in there. So I could be in a class of 20 and I would have been the only girl. And then when I got to third year, there were 4 of us majoring in physics and I was the only girl. So it was just, huge lack of females in that area. And you could look at that and go, oh, it's 25%, that's not bad, that's kind of like the industry standard. But when there's no other girls in the room, it's a very different thing, and the conversations that you have to put up with almost around you, not super great sometimes.
I can imagine. Well, men have and I don't know if women extend to this extends to women as well, mostly because I've probably never done something that's so strongly feminine that I've experienced the same situation, but our behaviour can go out the door real fast in the way that we communicate.
Which usually gels fine with me. I'm like, we've been mates for years, and some of the best times have just been me hanging out with the boys. But I guess there does get to a certain point where it's just like, this conversation's not okay. Like, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I really need some other girls around me right now, like just to chill the place down. Because you know how guys can get sometimes. They can just get wildly off on a very inappropriate tangent.
Oh no, it'd be horrendous. And I don't know if it's because I've been in the big city and I'm aggressive now, or if it's being embracing my own femininity and sensitivity and stuff. But I try to call people out when they're being like hyper masculine, or just saying some stupid bullshit. We had this really interesting one of I think it was the last podcast, Pete. We got into like gender and barbering.
Yeah.
And that was really fascinating. And
because you got your hairdressers, a hugely female profession, but barbering.
Yeah, and so the gender thing was super interesting from Pete's perspective. But he was basically saying we need all genders because we make each other great, because we need each other to check against, or like our own bullshit. We need someone to, we balance each other basically. And I agree. I think it's immensely important.
And things like science, hugely important. Like if you're all going to tackle a problem, like why do you all want to tackle it from the same point of view? Like take in different experiences, people from different areas, and like actually just think about it in different ways, from different impacts, from different points of view. Like you've only got things to gain from that. So why is it so segregated? It makes no sense to like someone who actually logically wants to fix a problem, like stand back and look what the problem actually is, because that's not helping anyone.
Did you have any like female lecturers or any other interactions?
At Waikato, there were, I think, 4 lecturers, and one of them was a female. At University of Auckland, there were a few female lecturers, but I didn't have any of them for the classes that I took. Yeah, even I don't think I ever had a female maths teacher, except for maybe a statistics teacher. But yeah, there are a growing number of females, but I didn't get to have any of them as my lecturers the second time round.
Okay, well, I suppose it's encouraging there's a growing number.
Yeah.
What do you have any like thought as to why girls don't gravitate to it so much? Do you think it's like a societal, this is what men do and this is what ladies do?
And we actually had some really great conversations about it in the postgrad room with physics. We were a really great group of guys there, and we would have some really awesome open conversations about it. And I remember sitting there with one of the other girls, because occasionally there are other girls. But we were sitting there and we're like, this is absolute crap that you have to be a certain kind of girl to survive this. Like it's not about, people say, oh, but boys are interested in cars and girls are interested in cooking. Like that's bullshit. Like I can give you 2 guys side by side and they won't be interested in the same thing. So why is it okay to say that about guys and girls? It's absolute crap. So we were saying, to be a girl that survives physics, because that's how we were talking about it. Like sometimes it is just trying to survive that industry, to survive those years or whatever, is you have to be like water just like rolls off your back, and you have to be really like eye on the prize. You have to work extra hard because your accomplishments aren't as bright as the guys. And it's just shit that you'd have to be like this really stubborn, like really strong woman to survive studying something. Like that's crap. Like, it's like, it's hard enough to get into education as it is, having to fund yourself and all that sort of stuff, let alone having to survive a mentality of the course when all we're here to do is to learn. Like we just want to learn about something, get better at it, and you have to survive. Like it's crap. And then it gets scary to the point where I would get terrified by other girls studying physics, because I would have assumptions about who they are, because I'm like, flip, if you're doing this, then you must be this really hard ass chick who like doesn't put up with crap, because that was my perception of what you had to be, I guess. So I was always really intimidated by other girls in physics. And sometimes you see this as well in business, as if you have women that are in high management roles, they are usually tough as nails and they're not approachable, because they have had to be like this really strong independent person to get to where they are. So quite often you don't think that's someone I could ask to mentor me or to help me through, because they're almost like that harden up mentality, like they're not going to sit down and be like, oh, like, did someone say something that offended you? That it's going to be like, deal with it, move on, get it done, like, yeah.
It's actually quite interesting. Have you ever seen Glow? It's like a Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. It's a Netflix thing. It was on the 2nd season. Basically a woman, it's based in the 80s, so men were still pigs. Men are pigs still, but worse so.
Not all of them.
Not all of them. But yeah, anyway. And basically she gets in a conversation with her best friend, who the guy, a network executive, tries to lay in, like get freaky with her super inappropriately, and super like she had no kind of setup to it, and
taking advantage of it, that's unheard of.
Yeah, basically that, right? And she was like, her best friend, who was also a co-star, was like, oh my God, like, why did you do this? Why couldn't you have just gone along with it and then just like politely, because she left, she bailed at the first sight she could. And the best friend was like, oh, well, you should have just dealt with it, because now this whole show is going to be fucked and da-da-da-da. And that was like, it was a hard thing to hear, It's obviously like art and film just kind of mirrors things in life. But then she talks to this guy about it and he's like, fuck that. And like, it smashes the dude's windscreen stuff. And it's fantastic. I think we need more guys like that. I think that would help.
It's getting better.
Absolutely. And it's only been a lifetime.
Yeah.
Less than that.
Yeah.
In that we went from the 50s, which was
straight cut gender roles.
Way different.
Yeah.
To now, it's 70 years.
Yeah.
It's not that long. So hopefully...
Like, I'm allowed to go to university now.
Yeah, Jesus. But in my mind, the ideal situation is that we keep progressing. And we keep pushing behind progressive policy, and that will eventually change culture, and culture's just slow at uptake. I do worry, about like the Trumps and Putins of the world.
There's this interesting aspect in science is what we call the old white guy, because when you think of a scientist, you go straight to a lab coat, guy with white or greying hair and glasses. Like, that is your picture of a scientist. But quite often there's these issues, and they've come up in the news quite often recently. I think there's one at MIT and things like that, of these basically older lecturers who have huge educational standpoints. Like, they are very important in their department because they do really important work, and like, they're so prestigious and blah, blah, blah. But they'll do something really, really not great. Like, they will sexually harass their female students. They will say inappropriate comments. They will say, like, I'll grade you up if you have sex with me, or whatever, like super bad stuff. And then the students will go to like the departments and complain about it, and they'll just say, oh, but he's going to retire soon, or he's from a different age. Like, you just have to ignore that sort of stuff. Like, they just make excuses for them because of their academic standpoint. They are important people in the scientific community, and so people make excuses for them. And like, that is happening a lot in every region, is people make excuses for other people because they're from different generations, or things were done differently where they are, or just ignore them because they're just like that. Like, that's not okay.
I think we have to challenge it, and I think it's almost more important for men to challenge it, because...
It was actually great. Like, one of my lecturers, brilliant guy, he did, so quite often at university they have lecture series that, like, public lectures, anyone can show up from any different school, department, it doesn't matter. And he did a lecture about how to be an ally to women in science. And I loved it because, like, he's saying, look, this is what a lot of them go through. And as a man, especially as a, like, potentially white male, like, this is where we are. Like, we've got it pretty great in the world of science, but this is what we can do to help. And I just loved that.
I think, yeah, and more of that, right? Like, more of that whatever that essence is, more of that everywhere is going to be helpful.
As it is, it's like 80 to 75% are males. And so if we can get 80 to 75% behind the other 20 to 25%, then that's going to be massively impact. Where if it's just the 20 to 25% fighting for themselves, that's a slow journey. And that's what I've seen in the past, Like, you look at the suffragettes and stuff like that, like, how many guys were out there marching with them? Whereas if you actually have the majority behind the movement, it's going to happen a lot faster.
Absolutely. That's progressive policy, right? And that's always the hope. How do you find... So that was a good little touch on the gender thing. And I just want to take it back to something that was sort of in the back of my head. Not to challenge, but just in curiosity. When you're sort of saying that, I'm going to do a physics paper, I'm going to do a physics degree, I don't really want to do PhD, and therefore I'm going to probably go into IT because that's the natural thing of my skill set.
I didn't know I was going into IT.
Yeah.
I was coming up to graduation. I was like, flip, what am I going to do?
Yeah. I
have no idea. And then I was actually super lucky because before I finished my study, I got contacted just through contacts, through people I knew of. There was a project where the publication date was 6 weeks in the future, and they'd had their data viz person basically bail on them. So they said, hey, we know you do some of this stuff. Can you come in and do our data visualizations for our project? So help us get the data, clean the data, and build it into something interactive. So I actually left university with that to go to. Literally had my last exam on the Saturday, started that on the Sunday. And then during all that, between when I'd accepted that, I interviewed for the current job I'm in now. So I actually left university with 2 jobs. So I was really lucky.
I mean, that is, yeah, absolutely. I don't mean to invalidate or presuppose. I guess I just have a curiosity around it, because maybe this was my own misconception about, like, in terms of what you were studying and stuff, but it seemed to be very astronomy focused and very space focused. And that's from what I perceived of what you were studying in terms of, like, what you were doing with your postgrad and stuff like that.
See, that was actually only my research. I never actually got to study any astro stuff, which was what I always thought I'd loved in high school. Like, I didn't have that passion, didn't know what I really loved, but I looked at space stuff and I go, I really enjoy that. And so that's, I guess, probably where the physics and astronomy came from, was it was just something like I'd just look at it and I'd go, wow. So I didn't actually get to study astronomy or astrophysics.
Is there an ability to study that?
A little bit. Like, in New Zealand, you can actually major in astronomy at Canterbury.
Okay.
At AUT, they actually are linked with the radio telescope at Warkworth. But it's not a massive field in New Zealand. It's growing because astronomy is more leading to the data mining, I guess. So, like, you get all this data from all these other telescopes and you work with it. So that's what my supervisor actually did. He gets data and he helps find exoplanets. So basically a planet that goes around a star that isn't the sun.
So he'd just be looking for various variables in the data, like something that would stick out to him and be like, that's a sign that there might be. Yeah,
so there's they know when an event is happening. So he actually worked with something called Gravitational Microlensing. And so that's something that Einstein came up with years ago and was like, theoretically this could happen, but we're never, ever, ever going to see it because of the conditions you would need to do it and blah, blah, blah. Since then, our technology's evolved and we are actually able to observe these events and they happen more often than we thought. So they know internationally when an event is happening, and so they'll notify all of the observatories where it's nighttime to record the event, and then they'll analyze all that data and try to figure out how big the planet is, how far away it is, and all that sort of stuff.
And so do you, because I think this is the misconception that I kind of wanted to touch on, and like, I think it's really important to say, to you especially, but to a lot of people, like, you can do a degree and not have that as your profession, but still be really interested in it, and everything you studied isn't invalid, right? Like, you can still have these passions, and
yeah,
you can
absolutely.
Still. And so, do you think that's going to be like kind of you with the astro and the space stuff? Is like you're just going to keep a toe in and kind of add your own interest?
It's actually really funny because that's the thing, is people at work slowly, you have conversations with them, and they slowly find out that I did that, and I'll be like, yeah, I did some stuff in astro, and they go, well, what the hell are you doing here? And it's like, well, no, like, there comes a point where you can draw the line in the sand and you can say, look, I really enjoy doing this, but that doesn't mean I have to do it as a career. I can do it as a hobby. I can keep up with it. And I do. Like, I join all the old guys on a Monday night, and I go to the Astro Society in Auckland. And even at work, we actually just started an astronomical group, and we just had our first outing, I guess, on Friday night, where a couple of us brought our telescopes and we all had Friday night drinks and then jumped across the car park and brought the telescopes out, and it was awesome.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and so, like, it's stuff that you love, but you don't have to actively do it as a career. And I think that's almost the pressure I put on myself growing up, was my mum always said, like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But she actually has said to me recently, she's like, I regret saying that, because that puts a lot of pressure on what you do. Like, it's your job. Like, end of the day, you kind of do it to sustain the lifestyle you want. Like, you do it because everyone in this society needs money, because we need to be able to afford a place to live and to buy food and perhaps go on holiday and all that sort of stuff. And, like, putting so much pressure on basically a 15-year-old to choose their future, like, when how much have you really experienced when you're 15? You haven't even learned of half the subjects you could study. You know, like it's so intense to say to someone like, choose your career now. Whereas it's like, I just say, look, find what you enjoy studying. If you even go to university, because that's not for everyone. Like, just do what you like. If you don't like it, change it, because even 3 years is a long time to do something that you don't like. Like, just do what you enjoy, find what you like, do that, and hopefully you can find a job in it, and, you know, just develop from there. Like, go from skill to skill to skill, rather than just trying to find this massive picture to find your big happy ending straight away.
It's not the case. And I might have mentioned this on this podcast before, but there was a Harvard professors being interviewed on The Atlantic. It was a video series, and it really stuck with me, because basically what they talked about was, what did they wish they learned in college? And almost verbatim, Harvard professors were saying, I wish it was okay to know it's better in most cases to have a horizontal career path, and that's okay. And so you don't need to like get on this fucking ladder. And you, like, for most people, they perceive the ladder starting at the high school.
Yeah. What
subjects am I going to take? Then how's it going to take me to university? And how am I going to get a job out of that? It's like, you're going to fucking change so much in that time that trying to plan something out from then is ridiculous. And it's okay to start in something. And this is obviously what I've done. So I want to say that's okay. But start in something and then move into something else that might not be related.
But it's like the totally interesting thing about my job, right? So I'm in the services department of an IT place, and it's super interesting because we are a really random mix of people. Like, there's a lawyer who does what I do. I'm a physicist. Yeah, there's IT guys and comp sci guys and computer engineering guys, but like, it's a massive mix of people. I think there's an accountant in there. Like, it's all sorts of people, and that actually works really well for our job because we're all thinking of things from a different standpoint. And it's like any team. You don't want every member to be the same. That's not how you have a strong team. You want someone who covers all bases. The only way you're going to do that is by having a full range in a team. And like, our generation is supposed to have like 5 different careers in our lifetime, I think. Like, that's not even 5 different jobs. Like, that's completely different careers coming from our parents who have usually had one career their whole life. Like, we are the generation of change, I guess. Like, we are going to chop and change around, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, and I think this needs to be reinforced hard out, because we have this very individualistic society with our parents saying, kind of putting expectation on us, a lot of us, you know, like in terms of your mum saying that's you, my mum blowing so much smoke up my ass that I'm surprised I'm still here and haven't floated away. But you don't have to be like the shining star of X profession, you know, like you don't have to be the next XYZ pop star or whatever, you know, like
I'm so good at singing.
Yeah, it's like, but like someone might do that, and that's cool, and that's their journey, and be happy for them. Don't be envious. Just be like, that's cool, that's your thing, you go. Good on you. I'm doing my thing. It's totally okay just to be you. And I think,
know what they say? You do you.
You do. I say that to Emma all the time, and she says it back to me ironically, being like, oh, you do you. She didn't hear that.
She heard it.
She heard it.
Shit.
No. Well, I think we've covered some really cool subjects and some really cool topics, and this feels like a good enough time as any to wrap it all up.
Before I start whipping out all my scientific citations.
Hey, you can whip them out if you want, but we're just hitting the hour mark, and I know it's getting late, and so I'm very appreciative that you came out and had a little yarn.
No, I'm very appreciative you found value in having a female on here. It's awesome.
Let's high five.
Oh, I was going to knuckle you.
Okay, let's knuckle.
Let's just do that.
Oh.
No.
All right. Thanks, guys. Goodbye.
Adios.